Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 10 essential challenging works for beginners. Now, you may think that the words challenging and beginner are mutually exclusive or oxymoronic. But as I said in my video, my little rant about what constitutes a beginner, who the hell are we to tell you what you may like as a beginner? The point when you're a beginner is to begin. And what you begin listening to, it's anybody's game. You find something that you like and just pursue it. The value in these lists is that I think it helps you understand who the players are, what they wrote, what the works are called, and this is one of those lists. So I am really curious to see how it comes across, especially for those of you who really are beginners, not for all you hardcore people who know all this stuff. And this is a crazy list. I promise you that. It covers everything. All kinds of different media and forms, every period under the sun. And challenging is not just harmony. It's not like dissonant harmony or atonal harmony or anything like that. It's challenging in every possible way because of length, because of the conventions that the music adopts, which may be very different from what we're used to. It's challenging in terms of the style, of course, but also within the oeuvre, within the output of each individual composer, some of their most challenging music. And, their most challenging music may not be all that difficult today, but it's still challenging. It could be emotionally challenging. It could be musically challenging. I'm talking about challenges. And I don't know, again, which challenge you're up for, but here are some to think about. And, a lot of people, I know I'm that type of person. If someone said to me, this is challenging music, don't listen to it until, you've really been listening for 20 years and you're ready, whatever the hell that means, I would listen to it right away, immediately, because I think that's bullshit. I mean, I'm ready. I know I'm ready when I say I'm ready. And sometimes when presented with a challenge, that makes the whole thing even more enticing and appetizing. And that's what I hope happens here, because I am enticed and appetized by these works. And even I don't like all of them. It's not a question of what I like. It's a question of what intrigues you and, what you find fascinating. So are you ready? You ready for the Big Ten, the Big Ten challenge? Well, anyway, let's go for it. Number 1, Handel. You're going to say, Handel? Hallelujah chorus, Handel? He's challenging? Well, yes, he can be, especially when the work in question is his greatest opera, and therefore possibly the greatest Baroque opera in general, Giulio Cesare, or Giulio Cesare in Egitto, Julius Caesar in Egypt. Now, this is the everything but the kitchen sink Baroque opera. And Baroque opera is a stylistic medium all of its own, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful, but you have to understand what the style is and how to get used to it. And I've done some chats about those. Baroque opera essentially consists of what you might call the da capo aria, chains of them, long stretches of da capo arias with recitative, or what they call secco recitative, dry recitative, sung speech, lightly accompanied by a harpsichord or with a string instrument below it that hurries the plot along. And once the plot has been hurried along, and some of these conversational things, which are just dialogue things, can be very, very long, you get the arias, which could also be very, very long. And the da capo form is very simple to describe. It's A, B, A. There's a first section where the singer sings on a very straightforward text, usually 3 or 4 lines of text, which they'll repeat endlessly in various permutations. Then there's a middle section for contrast, and then you repeat the A section and you ornament it. You get to do singerly Baroque things with it, as a jazz performer would ornament a melodic line. And that's the aria. Then the singer bows, everyone applauds, and they must leave the stage at the end of their aria, and the plot proceeds for a bit, and then you get another one. Well, this happens in Giulio Cesare for about 3.5 hours. And the music it's glorious. It's absolutely glorious. And Handel uses these arias, and the main characters have like 8 each, I mean, or more. And there's duets and stuff to construct character portraits of these operatic characters. Now, the pace of this whole thing is vastly slower than what our impatient life might be. And if you looked at my essential opera list, I emphasized contemporary operas mostly because they move at much more conversational pace that we're used to. The plots hurry along compared to what happens in Baroque opera. In Baroque opera, you have all the time in the world to work everything out. And, this 3.5 hour long opera, that wasn't even the whole show back in the day. In those days, you had concertos between the acts and other stuff. And, you were talking about it a whole day. And a whole day when you're sitting in a rather stuffy, unair-conditioned or unheated room with people for whom, toilet paper had yet to be invented and deodorant was non-existent, and it must have been quite something. And fortunately, that is not part of the challenge. Your only challenge is to listen to the thing, and you need lots of time to do it. But if you have the time, you're going to love it. It's extraordinarily beautiful music, and you pay attention to the evolution of the characters through the arias. How each one advances some development in their personality, and as all the while the plot is roaring along in the background. The story, of course, is Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. He's in Cleopatra in this case is disguised as Lila or Lilia, whatever her name is, for most of the opera, and then they fall in love, and her brother is Ptolemy, he's the bad guy. He's evil. And it's you just have to get used to those conventions. The other convention, by the way, is that the heroes, the Julius Caesar character and Ptolemy in this opera as well, were all castratos. They were castrated male singers with artificially high voices as a result of hormonal insufficiency. And if you didn't have one of those things on hand to sing your lead in Handel's day, you used a woman. I mean, what mattered was the vocal line, not the sex of the singer. So this can become very confusing because Cleopatra could have a voice which is actually lower, being a female lead, than the soprano male lead. So that's another convention you just have to get used to. I mean, in these days, it's actually kind of nifty. It kind of suits the temper of the times that all the sexes are sort of jumbled up, and the sound of the voice has nothing to do with the sex of the character. But that's another one of those conventions, and you just suck it up, folks. So that's challenge number 1. Challenge number 2. Beethoven, his string quartet number 13 in B-flat major, opus 130. With its original finale. Now, the original finale is this thing called the Grosse Fuge, the Great Fugue, the Grand Fugue, which is about 15 minutes long and was so crazy in Beethoven's day that he eventually disconnected it from the rest of the quartet and wrote a new finale for it. But most string quartets these days, a lot of them, let's put it that way, restore the original finale, which means there's an extra quartet movement hanging out there somewhere, which if you have a complete set of quartets, they may play or they may just jettison it and forget about it. But you got to hear it the way Beethoven originally wrote it. That's the challenge. The quartet itself is a beautiful work. It's a big work. It's a long work. It's like 50 minutes long with this. It's a big, long monster of a piece. Late Beethoven can be difficult to assimilate, not even before you get to the Grosse Fuge, because his style was very, very inward, and people thought he was crazy. Let's put it that way. And it's extremely expressive and it's all out there, I think. I mean, people say it's inward, but it's inward in the sense of, he had no boundaries. Everything expressed his innermost thoughts and feelings, but he expressed them. They're all like out there. They're on the surface of the music. There's nothing tricky about the music, but it is difficult music. It requires great concentration, great stamina on the part of the listeners and the players. And the Grosse Fuge, whether you listen to it separately or whether you listen to it as part of the quartet, and it's also been arranged for string orchestra, but not by Beethoven. It works quite well that way, is famous as one of the ugliest pieces of music ever written. I mean, it's ugly in the sense of it's rough, it's ragged. You know, a fugue comes from the Italian fugire, to fly, and it consists of, it's like a round. You know, where you have a tune and then another voice comes in and plays the tune, then someone else plays the tune. And they do it as this sort of contrapuntal game where they chase each other through the texture, playing the tune. And then, you know, where there'll be moments when the tune isn't present, which are called episodes. And then the tune will start up again, and that's called an exposition. And it may be played faster or slower or backwards or forwards or in all kinds of different combinations. And in this case, you have a double fugue. Ooh, baby. A double fugue is one where, well, a double fugue can be one of two things. But in this particular case, you have two themes presented simultaneously with entrances following, you know, after those two themes come in. And it is harmonically acerbic. I mean, this fugue is a battle. It's a battle. You know, Beethoven's music always had a sense of turmoil, a sense of struggle. And his counterpoint, his use of multiple voices, also embodies that. And this particular example is the ultimate sort of manifestation of that sense of rough, you know, it's an argument, it's a fight, it's a battle, it's a thing, it's ugly. It goes, like, it does that for like forever. And it actually has beautiful, beautiful interludes. It does. Trust me when I tell you. I mean, with today's sensibility of, you know, film music and the kind of music we're used to hear in jazz and what we believe is dissonant and not hard to take, you may not find it, you know, all that difficult from a harmonic point of view. It's incredibly difficult from a storm and stress and strain point of view. I mean, a string quartet that's playing it sounds like it's being tortured to death. It's really, really rough music. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, that's where the genius lays. Because, you know, today people can play anything. They can make it sound technically easy. There is no way this piece sounds easy. It never sounds easy. It's always difficult. And so that's challenge number 2. The entire string quartet number 13 with the Grosse Fuge. And if you don't want to do the whole quartet, start with the Grosse Fuge and see if you could back into it. I mean, that's your call. Challenge number 3. 3. Liszt. Are you ready for this one? The fantasy and fugue on the chorale ad nos ad salutarem undam. Doesn't that sound bizarre? Well, it's written down below so you can see what it is. What is this thing? Well, in my video on sonatas, I talked about the Liszt B minor sonata. It's one of the essential sonatas, big romantic sonata in a single half-hour long movement that you really, really need to know because it's a glorious work and it's not at all difficult. And it's difficult in terms of attention span, but not to follow at all. This sucker has a fugue like the Grosse Fuge, which, believe me, Liszt was well aware of when he wrote this particular example. It's based on a tune from a Meyerbeer opera, La Prophète. I think that's the opera it's from. But here's the catch here. First of all, there's this huge fantasy, on these tunes that precedes the actual fugue bit. Then there's the fugue bit. But this is also 30 minutes long in one gigantic, unbroken thing. And here's the kicker. Oh, this is the one that's really the challenge. It's written for organ. I told you it was going to be a challenge. Now, the organ, the world of the organ, organists, organ music, it's a totally separate universe, all of its own. And there is amazing stuff written for the organ, it's principally by Bach. But the number of organ composers that people care about is very, very small. Very small. I mean, there's the baroque organ tradition, which is, like I said, it's a different world within that different world. But the king of it is Bach, who wrote the greatest and best organ music of anybody, frankly. And Bach's organ music, well, it's actually pretty digestible. It really is. But especially if you know and like Baroque music. And the fugue was Bach's natural medium of expression. But by the time you get to the Romantic period, you're dealing with very, very few composers for organ music. There's Mendelssohn, and there's a bunch of French people. César Franck, Widor, W-I-D-O-R, Vierne, Guillemont, names like that. You don't have to worry about them now, I don't think, unless the organ entrances you. And Saint-Saëns, who wrote the Danse Macabre and other fun stuff, the Organ Symphony, he also wrote works for organ. The organ school basically went to France, but there were a few examples still hanging out in Germany. There were actually quite a few. There was Reinberger, and there was later Max Reger and Liszt, who was one of the really great composers for the instrument, although he wrote a very limited number of pieces, and this is his big organ extravaganza. And whether or not you can stand it is going to depend on how you feel about the sound of the organ for extended periods of time. I cannot second guess anybody in this. Some people really enjoy it. Some people would run away screaming. Some people say it reminds them of the awful time they had as a child when they had to sit through church services. I never had to deal with an organ, having been, growing up in synagogue where we didn't have those things. In a traditional synagogue, you congregation sings and the rabbi sings, but you don't have instrumental accompaniment because it's not permitted on the Sabbath. So that was convenient. So I approached the organ, I think maybe with a more open mind, or I don't know, or maybe I had a tendency to dislike it even more because it sounded like going to church to me. But this is a remarkable work. It's a very great work. It's a very difficult work. It's a very long work, and it's written for a very annoying instrument in large quantities. Now, whether or not you can tolerate a piece like this, an extended work for organ, really depends on the organ, not the organist, because the organ is one of those instruments. I mean, it's a mechanical device, and it sounds the way it sounds. There isn't much that the organist can do to change how it's going to sound, aside from choosing registers or stops that highlight different aspects of the billion pipes that go into making the thing. But between that and how it's recorded, if it's a room that's like it has acres of resonance and all that stuff, great organ recordings are few and far between. It's a terribly difficult instrument to record well, and this is one of those pieces. It's kind of mythical. It's honored in the breach. More people say they admire it than actually will listen to it. So it's out there. I'm telling you, it's out there, and you make up your mind. So that was 1, 2. We've only done 3, 4. Wagner, Tristan und Isolde, the legendary Wagner, Tristan and Isolde. If you thought Handel's Julius Caesar was long, wait till you wrap your brain around Tristan and Isolde. A good, juicy, solid 4 hours or 4 hours and a bit, in which even Wagner admitted nothing happens. Nothing happens at all. Well, it's not entirely true. I mean, do you know the story? Isolde is being brought back to marry Tristan, and she's terribly annoyed about it, and she wants to kill herself. So her lady-in-waiting gives Tristan and Isolde a magic potion that makes them fall decadently in love. Decadently because Wagner took this concept of, a simple magic potion, love potions, opera's full of that stuff, right? Well, this is more than, this is Schopenhauerian love. This is the philosophy of, suffering and death and pleasure and pain, and it's all mixed up, and it's terribly German. So in Act 1, they take the potion. That's what happens in Act 1 for, an hour and a bit. In Act 2, they have a love scene, which is interrupted by King Mark, who is Tristan's mentor, who proceeds to lecture them for an interminable amount of time on how disappointed he is that he's seen them together, because she's being brought back to marry King Mark. And Tristan is the one that she's hanging with now. So Mark is understandably pissed, and there's a guy with a sword named Merlot. Actually, it's Melot, but I call him Merlot. I mean, I just think it sounds so much more appealing. And he stabs Tristan. So that's Act 2. And in Act 3, Tristan dies. And so does Isolde. And nothing happens. He's been stabbed, and he's ranting and raving, and he's delirious, and he wants to see Isolde, and he rants and raves for 45 minutes, and then Isolde finally shows up, and he drops dead, and she has an enormous psychosomatic musical orgasm called the love death, in which she dies too, and that's the end of the opera. And so if you can deal with Tristan and Isolde for 4 hours and a bit, I admire you. And I have to say something about it. Here's the fascinating thing about Tristan and Isolde. Even though nothing happens, and it required 50 rehearsals when it was initially written before they abandoned any hope of a premiere, and tenors have died singing Tristan. I mean, it's a difficult work. It's a challenge. The music is incredibly beautiful, extremely beautiful. It's revolutionary as a work that supposedly heralded the advent of atonality and all that stuff. It had an enormous impact on later music, which you don't have to concern yourself with if you're not interested in it. But here's the thing. If you see it live, it really works. It works wonderfully live. It's terrific live. I think listening to it in the abstract is actually rather more difficult. And you think it would be just the opposite because nothing happens. So you can just sort of listen to the music and take it that way. But no, it's a fabulous dramatic work. It really is. I have no idea why it happens that way, but it is. So if either watch it or go see it, or if you are up to it, listen to it with the text, follow those words, and you'll have initiated yourself into a select group of classical music aficionados that you can go and impress your friends. So that's number 4. Number 5. Well, now we have a couple of symphonies, 3 symphonies, which are perhaps among the most challenging of their various composers. And so we don't have to spend a lot of time with them. One is Mahler's 6th Symphony, number 6, which is deeply tragic, but at the same time incredibly exhilarating and powerful, and I think just tons of fun because I've played it. And I've said this before, when it's over, the players just look at each other and they think, that wasn't tragic, that was great, let's do it again. It makes you feel better. But it's an hour and 20 minutes roughly, and it ends with utter apocalyptic destruction, and the victory of fate over all human striving, which is extremely graphically enacted in the finale, which has sledgehammers coming down and all kinds of barriers to fulfillment. And it's an amazing work, just an amazing work, and a challenging work. And I'm just going to leave it at that and let you go for it, because I've talked about Mahler in some other of these talks. And if you want to get into him, you're going to have to do the 6th anyway. So after Mahler, there is Sibelius' Symphony number 4. This is his tragic symphony. I don't know if it's tragic so much as desolate. It is an essay in hardcore desolation and bleakness. And it too attempts to have a happy culmination in the finale, and it too collapses into complete and utter what's the word? Well, I guess desolation is the word. I mean, I've said it a few times. It's much shorter than Mahler's 6th. It's about 35-40 minutes long, but it's extremely bleak and hauntingly beautiful. Really is. It's an amazing, amazing piece. But it will leave you when it's over. That's a sure thing. And after that, not a tragic work at all, actually a triumphant one. Bruckner's Symphony number 8. This is Bruckner's largest and last completed symphony, because he didn't finish his 9th. And it lasts an hour and a half, an hour and 25 minutes. It's a big sucker. It has 2 moderately quick first movements, then a huge, long, slow movement, and then a big, long finale. And it exists in a couple of versions. And what you want is the last version. You do not want the original version. If it says original version, avoid, avoid, avoid. Flashing red lights. Stay away, stay away, stay away. Because Bruckner revised it. And you want something that says, revised version, or 1890 or 91 or whenever it was. If it says original or it's in the 1880s, Don't go there. I'm telling you, Bruckner is a problem. Bruckner is a challenge just because the Bruckner people are insane, and his music exists in all these different versions that they've all published as equally desirable and fascinating, and they're not. I mean, they're just not. And so, dealing with Bruckner is a project as a result of that. But the Eighth Symphony is a glorious work. It's a big, long, challenging, transcendental piece of music. But, you got to decide amongst the two major versions and then decide what it all means and how much you like it if you have the time to deal with it. As you can see, a lot of these pieces, the challenge is time. The challenge is really taking the time. I understand anybody who says, I don't have time to spend an hour and a half listening to something that I don't particularly care for. Life is too short. And if life is too short, as I've said before, don't listen to it. Don't listen to it now. If you're feeling guilty because you didn't listen to it, just wait a while. Wait a while until you're in the mood, and then maybe it'll all come right. It'll strike you. But you can't know. You can't know in advance. So Bruckner's Eighth is the big Bruckner symphony, the biggest of all the Bruckner symphonies in terms of expressive range and sheer duration. And I think that it's well worth the challenge. It really is. It's a glorious piece of music, absolutely fabulous, but a challenge. It's difficult. It's not easy listening. So after Bruckner, we're already up now to number 7 because we got through those 3 symphonies rather quickly. Bartók, String Quartet number 4. Now, Bartók's string quartets are legendary. They are so highly respected. They are supposedly, I'm just saying this, the great efforts in the medium after, Beethoven and those people. There are great 19th century string quartets, principally by after Beethoven, Mendelssohn and Dvorak and a couple other people. The Czechs did very well by string quartets, Smetana, but the Bartók quartets are the iconic 20th century string quartets, and they begin with an extremely what they call chromatic. That means harmony. Well, it's sort of like jazz harmony. Blues harmony is chromatic. It's harmony with notes outside the key. And it's what Wagner was doing when he wrote Tristan and Isolde. It creates harmony that's very yearning and suspended and dissonant because it doesn't resolve into typically happy places. But Bartók began that way in his first couple quartets and then started adopting the rhythm and melos of Hungarian and Bulgarian and Eastern European folk musics, and integrating that into a very modernist language, a very dissonant language. And so the fourth quartet is really cool. It's written in what we call arch form. That is, it has 2 quick movements and then 2 scherzos, which are like dance movement type things, and then a slow movement in the middle. The slow movement is a nocturne. It's a night music piece. Bartók was famous at doing night music pieces that has creepy, velvety background with little insect noises and bird twitters and spooky nocturnal sounds in the middle. His music for strings, percussion, and celesta was the work that served as much of the soundtrack to Kubrick's film The Shining. So you know what you're in for with this quartet. It's spooky, it's rough, it's dance-like, it's folksy in places, but it's challenge. It's challenging music. And if you like it, then for at the very minimum, you should do 3, 4, 5. Those are sort of the central string quartets of the 6. There are 6 in all that display Bartók at his most typically mature and Bartókian in the string quartet medium. But they're all worth listening to. They're wonderful, wonderful works. And something to consider. If you've done the Beethoven Grosse Fuge, you can probably do Bartók, I think, because the Beethoven sort of sounds like Bartók in some places. It's that far ahead of its time. So Bartók String Quartet number 4. Next, Schoenberg, Pierrot Lunaire. What is Pierrot Lunaire? Pierrot Lunaire is 21 poems that are set for singer/reciter/voice person and a weirdly constituted chamber ensemble. And they are creepy, spooky poems I've done a talk on Pierrot Lunaire. You may want to go and look that up. It is a magnificent work. It was a revolutionary work. Another one of those pieces that really advanced the cause of music. It's completely or mostly atonal, which means, people worry about the word atonal. I mean, they say, well, it doesn't have melody. It has all dissonant harmony. Yeah, okay, so what? It does. I mean, who cares? What matters is whether the music does what it's supposed to do and expresses what it wants to express. And if you read these creepy texts, oh my goodness, black moths covered the moon. And they're very spooky, decadent texts, and the music fits them to a T. The music is extraordinary. The piece absolutely astonished virtually everyone who heard it, and even people who don't like atonal music or music without a normal melody or key center tend to enjoy Pierrot Lunaire, if only because the poetry is just so wonderfully weird and the music is so well suited to it. So yeah, it's challenging in terms of its idiom, the harmonic idiom, the style that Schoenberg adopts for this really revolutionary piece. In a sense, it's not challenging at all because like all of this music, what's the challenge? The challenge is external in a way, because the music does exactly what it says it's going to do. In all of these cases, what you'll find is that the music is perfectly adapted to what the composer wants to express. So in that sense, there shouldn't be a challenge because it's completely honest. Totally honest music. It has no secrets. There's nothing abstruse or sneaky about it. But the challenge, perhaps, is in accepting what the composer is trying to express and allowing yourself to simply say, whoa, I never wanted to experience that before. And who knew that music could do that? And do I want to subject myself to music that expresses that? That's the real serious question, not really the style or the idiom. It's the question of, are you open to the experience or not? That's really the issue. So after Schoenberg, I'm going to wrap it up with just a fabulous 20th century orchestral extravaganza, Messiaen, Olivier Messiaen's Turangalila-Symphonie. Now, Messiaen was another one of those crazy 20th century people who, in the 20th century, composers felt compelled, especially avant-garde composers, to invent their own musical language and to try and thus differentiate themselves from the common practice or traditional musical styles that were then current. Some of that meant being atonal, sometimes it didn't. Messiaen could be anything. Messiaen's styles, the style that he invented, was sometimes could be very tonal and very melodic, and sometimes it could be completely other. It consists of a few elements. Those elements are bird song. He was an ornithologist and fascinated by the sound of birds, and he sat around transcribing bird calls and finding musical equivalents for them. But they don't always sound bird-like because sometimes, he has them played by bassoons or something like that, or slowed down or speeded up. But there's bird song. There is Hindu rhythms. He studied the rhythms of Hindu music, which are very complex and fascinating, and he incorporated those into his music. And then there was his harmonic style. He had a synesthesia. He saw colors when he heard certain harmonies. He was like Scriabin in that respect. And he created an entire language of music based on the coloristic aspects of different chords. And some of those chords could be extremely tonal, beautiful tonal chords that were blue, and some that were magenta. And they could be very dissonant. And he evolved this whole language out of it. Now, the Turangalila-Symphonie, Turangalila means, it's Sanskrit, and it means cosmic love, play, death, creation, destruction of the cosmos, or something like that. And it's this big orchestral piece in 10 movements. He calls it a symphony. It's really more like a suite in the sense that, there's no movement that's in a traditional symphonic form. And there are different movements are called different things. He enacts in one piece, there are love movements where you have a love theme. And, and he's very obsessed in this piece with the myth of Tristan and Isolde, Wagner. So if you know the Wagner, maybe you'll have a bit of an angle on this particular piece. There's a wonderful central movement called the Garden of Love's Sleep. So he's got love songs. There's like 3 or 4 of those. And then he's got movements called Turangalila 1, 2, and 3. These are rhythmic studies that tend to be very mechanical in the sense because they're rhythmic. I mean, they're rigidly rhythmic and scary and spooky and very, very interesting, in terms of their sonority and sound. And then, the other movements are called whatever they're called. But the bottom line is he wrote it for this enormous orchestra with a solo piano and a solo glockenspiel, which is, bell thing, but a keyboard glockenspiel played with a keyboard. And most importantly, an undam, which is an electronic instrument. It's like a theremin. A theremin is, that thing with the antennas. You wave your hands next to them and it goes, whoa, whoa, like that. Well, that's what this thing does. And so it has an undam in it going, wow, whoom, in the middle of it and in strange places. So it sounds like nothing you've ever heard before. The fifth movement actually is not the Garden of Love Sleep. The fifth movement is called The Joy of the Blood of the Stars. And it's you'll hear tunes. There are themes that recur throughout the symphony so that you know where you are, what the signposts are. Parts of it sound like, people said, like Hollywood soundtracks, love themes from a 1940s Hollywood sentimental romance mixed with crazy rhythm and birds and atonal stuff and screaming brass and craziness. It's all over the place. And I think it's fabulous. I love the thing. It's just marvelous. And if you are up for the challenge, then I think you'll love it too. It's really extraordinary. An extraordinary 20th century masterpiece. It was written in the 1940s. And it's amazing. So there, my friends, you have 10 challenging works for beginners. They're for you because the fact that you're a beginner, as I said before, is totally irrelevant to whether you're up to the challenge of the music. That is entirely a personal thing. And I would simply urge you to find out for yourself whether you're up for it or not. I don't, you do. So I trust you completely. Keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.